All right, so welcome. It's good to be back with everyone again. Today, actually, I know in previous sessions we've talked about the Carlsbad structure and things we can learn, primarily like openings based and strategy based from different positions. And today I'm back with Endgames specifically. I think I definitely wanted to do one session on this because I know we've spent some time looking at various engine games and talking about different lessons that we can use in our own games based on engine games. And, one of the really the eye openers, I think, by using the computer as an analytical tool is just how precise, how even more precise we can be. And there were some positions I'd seen in the past few months that had really, truly shocked me. Like I was actually in the past month, I was really shaken by some of these positions. And I thought, what better way than to share them with you and see if you have the same reaction. So we're going to take snippets from games where we're well out of the opening in all these games. And I'm going to try and ask you to figure out what would be your approach in this position to press an advantage home, essentially. And they're going to get progressively more complex and challenging, but there'll be some commonalities with the themes. So I don't know if we're going to have time for all of them. But the first few examples in particular are going to have to do with opposite colored bishop positions. Of course, the old dogma when we're coming up as very young players, as we hear people say all the time, opposite colored bishop endings are mostly drawn because, they're fighting opposite squares and there's nothing you can do with it and yada, yada. And then as you get stronger in the game, you become a class A player and then maybe an expert. And you realize, oh, well, actually, not if they're heavy pieces on the board. And then that becomes a theme that comes to your mind. The new wrinkle in the past, I would say, 5 years or so, and I hope I'm not really insulting the greats by saying this, because I'm sure you can find examples from much longer ago, but it's just more present today, is the rook pawn dynamic and how you can use a rook pawn to take tremendous space and also use that as kind of an asset to kind of get the pawn further along to be a queening pawn, but also to kind of lock in the opponent's pieces. And this first example is a perfect picture of that. You see the material is equal and, but no one would actually say this position is completely equal. Anyone want to tell me what advantages white has here? So I see some folks. All right, so I'm gonna give the floor to Ryo. Tell me what you see here as far as what white advantages exist.
Well, the pawn on h6 is weak because, like, for example, in the future when my rook gets in, I can play rook h8 and take the pawn. I'm not saying obviously now. And f6 pawn is weak, but it's more easily defendable, but it's harder to reach, so it isn't really a weakness right now. c5 pawn is clearly a weakness. And a5 pawn is kind of a weakness as well.
All right, so you're basically saying every pawn is weak except the G pawn. That's a fair observation. Fair observation. Also, sorry, I cut you off there. You want to say something else?
Yeah. So my idea was actually to play king d3, king c4, and to see you cannot get off the 7th rank because I just play rook b7 after rook d7, rook d2.
Gotcha. So king d3, king c4 would be your initial plan that you'd be looking at. By the way, there's a. I'm in New York City, so there's an ambulance making noise behind me. If you can hear in the background, I'll go away in a moment. So, but yeah, so king d3, king c4 is what you're looking at, Ryo?
Yeah, king d3, king c4, rook b5. And I don't see how you're going to defend the pawn, honestly. Maybe there's a way, but that would make your pieces very passive.
Gotcha. Now, one of the things, so actually before I interject, let me also get some feedback from someone else that might be interested in sharing. So I'll also throw it to Aradhya.
Yeah, basically like the same thing. Also, I was thinking that, like, yeah, like Black's king on G7 is like really bad because it's never gonna like get anywhere because the pawn on H6, and I guess he technically could by like putting his rook on like H8, but that's not gonna move either. And also, I think our king is also pretty good, and also our rook has more potential.
All right, let me ask you a question just to follow up, because you were agreeing mostly with Ryo about the features in the position, the kings being there being a tremendous difference between the kings, the pawns there's a difference. So Black has a lot of targets. It seems White not as much. What would be your approach here? Ryo gave a plan with King D3, King C4. Do you concur with that? Was there something else that you would start with? Because there's no doubt here that White is better. I think we can all look at that and see the difference in the pieces. The question is, how do you get it done? So what will be your approach, Aradhya, if you were making a decision?
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
There you go.
Well, yeah. Basically, yeah. I think King D3, King C4 is good, but maybe next we can go like King B5, Rook C3, and also I think I don't think like Black can do much like in any way, so like I don't think there's any problem really.
Gotcha. So essentially, that's a very decent plan. I think one of the things I like that I would think about, and again, I'm a little biased because I've seen the game, but not allowing counterplay. So just as an aside, if you go King D3, maybe Black feels compelled to go Rook D7. I'm not saying this is going to be, the best thing in the world, but maybe then if Rook D7 check. Let's say Rook D3, let's say King D3, Rook D7 check, King C4. Maybe there's some scenario where the Rook gets in behind. Obviously not now because there would be a Rook B7 pin issue. And maybe there's some semblance of counterplay with the Rook getting behind. I don't know. I think your plan is pretty legit. White clearly is better. But maybe there's some vision with like Bishop E5 here, I could think, and then maybe Rook D2. And maybe you're allowing me something I don't deserve. I still have my reservations about whether that's the case, but I think you're mostly on the money here about what the factors are and how you can prosecute the advantage. Now, of course, this is an AlphaZero Stockfish game that was not released in the original batch of games that were released, and the plan that was taken here I thought was particularly interesting because it limited counterplay, and the move that White played here was actually Bishop D3, and I think it just also demonstrates a serious degree of patience. I think everyone understands. Let me not say everyone understands. In the next few moves, you'll be able to very clearly see why Bishop D3 happens. And I think the bigger point, too, is that Black still doesn't have really activity, so you can afford to be a bit more patient. So Bishop D3 is played. And then after Bishop D3, there was the move Bishop E5. And after Bishop E5, we had Bishop C4. And let's look at the position in a few moves. Rook C7, King F3, King F8, Rook B8 check, King G7, Rook G8 check, King H7, and Rook E8. And we can stop here and say, wow, in just 5 or 6 moves, the difference here with what happened is dramatic. And instead of putting the king on C4, we put the bishop on C4, and there was no way for Black to really enter or even get counterplay. And I think that the real benefit, too, was that we really twisted Black's pieces into a pretzel. So you have this rook behind the C pawn that's not doing much. This king was on E2, and it temporarily guarded entry squares on the D file so that the Black rook could invade. And now the rook is tied down. There might be visions of going King E4, King F5. And even the bishop is limited in scope on E5. You basically have tremendous problems here, and you didn't give Black anything. And so now it's just a headache. And it's like one weakness, one headache. There's a headache here. There's a headache here on A5, C5, even F6 is kind of a headache, and it just gives it's just very uncomfortable to deal with. I'll keep the game going a little bit, but Rook A7 was played now. The threat immediately was Rook A8 already. And, maybe the bishop goes to c3, but we can imagine the king running in. So rook a7 was played. And now king e4, rook c7, king d5, king g7, rook a8 now, bishop c3, and king d6. And again, you can see the king is achieving the maximum. Black's pieces really haven't got anything done. And you can just see the value of that bishop on c4, that regrouping of a bishop that seemed pretty stellar already on g6, taking away squares from the king, just repositions itself in a way where the king still is lacking oxygen. Now, after bishop e5 check, king e6, bishop c3, there was a little repetition here, and I would ask you, what next? Because it seems like white has achieved the maximum here, at least without winning material. The rook is on a8, the bishop is on c4, the king is on c6, but you really have to win the game. And that, I think what happened next really surprised me. I did not conceive of that being a winning strategy. And I think it just, frankly, I don't think anyone's going to get it, but I think it was just shocking to me that this was the most efficient way to win the game. All right, so I'll throw it to, so in addition to having a move, I want to hear more of like a general concept of like what you're trying to do in the next 5 to 10, not just in the next move. But I'll throw it to Sefer. If I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, probably not, but let me know. Say it again.
Sepair.
Sepair. Okay. Is that better?
Yes. So,
Okay.
I wanted to like bring the king to d6, but it's impossible with bishop e5 check. So I played rook e8 first, then king d6, and there might be a possible like potential idea of f4.
Gotcha. So you're playing rook e8 and king d6, trying to win the c5 pawn. Is that the aim, or what's the aim with king d6? Like, let's say my rook moves away. Are you trying to get the c5 pawn? Sorry, I think maybe I muted you. But what I was wondering is,
I muted myself by accident. Yeah, the plan is also to like take the c5 pawn and play f4 if needed.
Gotcha. So one thing, I think that plan is pretty interesting. I'm not saying definitively it's right or wrong. We're just kind of thinking about what the right course of action may be. One of the things I noticed immediately, and that you should notice as well, is that c5 pawn is providing really excellent security for the bishop. So if you win the c5 pawn, you all of a sudden have to reckon with the rook having an open file, your bishop not being as secure, and maybe black can make trouble coming from behind. Because again, this bishop here is really having trouble harassing the white king at the moment, right? And so if the pawn on c5 is gone, all of a sudden this bishop might have more counterplay on the a3, f8 diagonal, in addition to kind of constantly poking with the bishop e5 check, and the rook might have more scope as well. So it's also thinking about the quality of the pawns and what purpose they're really serving. I'm not so sure you actually want to pick off the c5 pawn right away. That being said, I do think, f4 breakthrough is fairly sensible. And, well, if you can undermine on the king side, that might work for you. So let's keep going. So white played rook b8, rook f7, f3, rook c7. There's always serious patience here in these games. Again, why not? Even if you're playing an opponent, and at this point it's like you're past the time control. Be patient, and they're more likely to make further mistakes, right? Especially in the human game, right? So there's nothing is spoiled by being patient most of the time. Rook a8, king h7, king d6, as was just pointed out. Bishop e5, king d5, a little triangulation dance. The king did not go back to e6 this time. And bishop c3, rook a6, king h7, a little triangle, and e4. And this e4 move really shocked me, because I was like, wait, what is going on here? This e4 pawn, right, is now giving black really fantastic dark square control. It seemed crazy to me. All of a sudden, the majority that white was working with on the king side seems to be kind of null and void. And what were the last few moves really about? Black played king g7, and over the next few moves, a new transformation took place. And I think this is something that really was just remarkable to me. If anyone want to have any suggestion of the new transformation that took place from here. All right, so I see some of the same voices, but I'm looking for a new voice. So Asish, go for it.
Oh, I said like rook c6, and if like rook takes, king takes, it's almost like I didn't see that bishop. I need to look more at it, but I think this was like some moment for like a Zugzwang.
So here's the thing. If you play rook c6 and I take, I'm going to argue that this is a dead draw, because I don't care about the c5 pawn. As long as my bishop can hold the a5 pawn, I can just keep on the diagonal and control your breakthroughs. There's no way you're going to get in here. So, if I'll just wait with bishop d2, you can have this one, and I'm just going to wait. And there's no way you can break this bishop. You can't push the king off g7. Even if you got in f4 and e5 under the right circumstance, there is really no right circumstance unless somehow you had your king coming to d7 and then e6, e7 would happen. But even then it would be a draw, frankly, because the king can go to f8 and the bishop can go to b4 and still hold the e7 square. So you really want to be wary of going to the pure obstacle of bishop endgame unless you know there's going to be some unstoppable breakthrough idea, essentially. So we can get more. And basically the whole reason for this rook b8, rook a8, rook a6, and now e4, king g7 is, strangely enough, this move e5. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what is going on here? And this is, I think, it's really remarkable because it's not something that we would immediately think of. And in some ways, I don't know if it was the only way to win, but it's extremely efficient. And the point is that this c pawn, again, is not the important pawn. It's these rook pawns that are the important pawns here. And at the end of the day, if bishop takes e5 now, there's rook takes a5. And that's a problem. And if f takes e5, it seems like we've just given a theory pawn. But actually, with the rook on a6, we've opened up a new avenue for counterplay. And you understand that certain pawns are more valuable than others. And now after bishop d3, another really remarkable move, you have a situation where the h pawn is going to drop, and the c and e pawns are really inconsequential. They're ultimately obstructing the bishop on c3 from having any real defensive purpose, and we're getting a and h. We're really pressing the a and h pawns, which are the really important ones. So just incredibly instructive. The position, I think, now is it's easier to understand that it's lost because you see that the h pawn is going to drop. With the threat of rook g6 check, the king can't really stay on h7 because of discoveries. And once the h pawn drops, it's kind of like a domino effect. The g pawn will soon drop. And so it's just very difficult to survive. But anyway, rook f7 was played, rook g6 check, king h7. Bishop e4, just another lovely consolidating move. I think it's still easy to kind of get a little bit greedy. Look at a move like rook takes g5 and feel very good about your prospects there. But the point is, there's no need to rush, and there's even more value in keeping the bishop on c3 out of the scope of the position, right? Out of the defense when the pawn is going to drop regardless. So. Bishop e4, rook takes g5 now. The g pawn dropped instead of the h pawn. Now h6 is chronically weak. And now I love the fact that even now the c pawn isn't really taken because it's a means by which the rook has no open file, the black rook, and the bishop does not have a diagonal back to the king. And I think for the rest of the game is pretty clear to see that white can mop this up, even with the pawns being equal, given the constant headache that black has, right? 4 isolated pawns. That's the most you can have, right? Or 4 islands, I should say, right? The most pawn islands you can have in chess, right? So in a chess position. So huge problem. And now tickling the a pawn. Now coming back to the c4 square that was so useful before. Now black says, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to give up this pawn. and white mops up. And then you have a situation where ultimately, through really nice maneuvering, you have a situation where all of a sudden all the pawns are gone. And it's like, well, what happened? What happened? So I just thought that was a stunning way to kind of do it, because you can think about, you saw the H and the A pawns as assets to kind of break open the position. All right, next example. Next example. Okay. Oh, this is not the next example. This is a really tricky example, and we're gonna get to this one last, but I'm having to flip through. No. Here we are. Okay. So this example, okay, really starts after rook takes g4, and we have a very similar rook opposite colored bishop dynamic that is present here. And they're very similar shades to the previous example we just looked at. And so I see a voice in the chat saying, "Well, I've seen this, or I've seen this game." And don't worry, you're gonna the example after this, I'm sure you haven't seen, and really was quite remarkable. But I think building on the previous example, this is another one where we can kind of look at the features and understand that even though in this position actually, Black's a pawn up, White is the one that has the advantage. Why is that? All right, so I didn't see, all right, let me see. I can see some voices here. Alexander, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe White could try to take advantage of the 7th rank and play something like rook e7, and then not immediately rook e7 because that just allows rook e8, but at some point follow up with rook e1, rook f7, rook e7.
All right, so give me a little bit more. So you said the 7th rank is an asset. What else is an asset here for White? What makes? Oh, sorry.
Basically all the pawns in the 7th rank are kind of weak.
All the pawns in the 7th rank are weak. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's about it.
Okay. Was there anything compared with the last game that kind of seems similar as far as the pawn structure is concerned, as opposed to what White might be able to do with expansion?
He could try to do something like a5, a6.
Okay.
Try in a way to open the a file. I don't think it could work immediately, but maybe in a few moves.
Okay. All right. So that's really a big part of it. Essentially, even though White is a pawn down, of course, White has the one open file in the position, but it's even more than that. It's the quality of the bishops. This bishop on g3 actually is pointing straight at the king, where this bishop on c4 is kind of, again, not, I mean, you can argue, well, it's pointing near the king, and it's true that it is, but it's really not as effective on c4. It cannot do it. It cannot attack and defend at the same time the way the bishop on g3 does. And then also with the pawn structure, you can see that White has potential for expansion, kind of making the king's position on a8 even more problematic, basically. So those factors really make it a tremendous advantage. And I think AlphaZero, this is another AlphaZero Stockfish example. I believe, and again, this is old Stockfish, not Stockfish 13 at NUE, but I think there was, I think the AlphaZero evaluates positions in terms of expected score. And so, if it's 50% expected score, that's like a completely even position. I think here White was AlphaZero was evaluating the position as like 80% expected score, which is like the equivalent of like +1, essentially, maybe more than +1, which is quite significant. Like, why is White very close to winning, if not winning? Like, that's an interesting question. So before, let's look at the next few moves and see the transformation. So first, White played f3, very important move. I saw folks in the chat saying rook e7 or a5 or rook e1, but f3 is huge because it gives White some light square coverage on the king side, so that White's king is not super airy, and most importantly, as Sir Wagner is mentioning, it stops rook e4. And so, you ensure that the file is under control. Because I would argue if rook e7, I think black would be thrilled to get in rook e4, because it means that the A rook won't enter the game, and if at least immediately. And even though this bishop is still, believe it or not, really tragic, I think it would be a slightly different story. So anyways, f3, rook g6, a5. Again, I think rook e7 might seem like a very, very natural move, but if you don't have this clamp on the king, on the black king, the story might be a little bit different. And you see here that fixing the king on a8 is really valuable. So rook f6, rook ae1, there's a tactic here, rook f8, king f2, just defending f3 and, you know, improving, g6, rook e7, h5, bishop e5, rook g8, and bishop g7. And you can just see here and be like, wow, white has made a lot of progress, and black really hasn't been able to do much. And you can see from the position that we've started with like 6-7 moves ago, this is very different. It doesn't even feel like black is up a pawn right now. And the domination themes are really present. It's just pretty remarkable. I mean, it's amazing. You look at the first picture and you're like, okay, white has compensation, maybe a decent amount better, and then wow, like this looks terrible. So huge difference. Rook c8, bishop d4, just a little tickled, and come back to the blockading square. And just like before, when we saw in the previous example, the white bishop on c4 blocking a pawn on c5, you see this bishop on d4 doing a tremendous job of really not allowing the bishop on c4 to get back and serve as a defensive piece. It's not participating in the defense. And, you know, looking back on it, I really did wonder if, you know, somewhere around here, I don't know where, to be honest, but somewhere around here, it might have been a value just to go d4. I don't think it would have changed the whole game, but just to put the bishop on d5, where all of a sudden it's not locked in by its own pawns, and it's still not quite participating in the defense, but it's better than it's been on c4 the past, you know, bunch of moves. Although Zoe makes a really, really excellent point that, you know, why don't you, if you don't mind pointing it out, what's so tragic about d4 that obviously is not possible here?
White can play bishop e5 and then bishop takes d4.
Yeah, so actually the idea at the moment might be kind of rubbish, but fair point. Yeah, bishop e5, this might be a little bit annoying. Although I would say, man, getting that bishop to d5, well, I think it might help a little bit, you know, just at least make challenge white a little bit, you know? I don't know. I just, this bishop on c4 locked in after bishop d4 just looks really tragic to me. So anyway, so bishop b5, king g3. Now the king comes in, right? This bishop still has the difference in the kings, difference in the bishops, difference in the rooks. Does it really feel like black's up a pawn here? I mean, not to me. Bishop d3, the bishop is struggling to get play, and now king h4. Now we have like, you know, a Nigel Short king march in the endgame, right? Many of you have probably seen this, the king march with king f2, king g3, or king h2, king g3, king h4 to mate a black king on g7 with the queen and king in that very interesting game. I don't know, I forgot who the player is that Short was playing in that game, but Short Timon, thank you. Someone has pointed, thank you, Alexander. But yeah, it's almost the same deal. And the other thing too is with the kings being such a difference, that difference in the king position really does mean exchange sacrifices also come into play, because there's someone has said once, like, you know, white's up a king essentially. So that's basically the issue. So let's just enjoy the technique. So bishop f5, king g5, bishop g7. Again, this rook is just locked in. And maybe actually here, I'll stop here and just ask, what's the winning plan again? Because the position clearly looks optically very desirable, but it's pretty important to actually be able to bring this home. I mean, and it might not be the easiest thing in the world to do that. And so I think this actually is a good moment to think, how do you actually win the game in the long term? Arnav, you want to tell me what you're thinking? Oh, no, Mike. Okay. I'll throw it to Sarvagna.
So I was thinking about A6. So just to open up the, open up the seventh rank even more. So after A6, like if B takes A6, you could play Rook C7, Rook E7, and then A7 falls.
Yeah. I mean, A6 looks pretty devastating. One thing I would challenge you on is maybe the timing of A6. So maybe if you play A6 quickly, I might be able to get like some type of relief for my king. So I would try to tighten the screws a little bit more with. I think you were about to say how you tighten the screws.
Oh yeah, like I think after A6 there might be Bishop D3. So like Bishop E3, or actually maybe Bishop C8. But
Well, if you're white, how would you try to tighten the screws before playing A6? If that was something you were trying to do.
Rook C7 first.
Yeah, like I was just thinking something along combination of like Rook C7, Rook E7, Bishop D4, some combination of those. A6 right away might be decisive. I mean, it would require some calculation. Of course, Bishop D3, as is pointed out in the chat, right away after A6 would just allow A takes B7 and Bishop E5 mate. But if it doesn't work right away, you've really traded in a really valuable asset, right? That A pawn is your most valuable pawn. But yeah, there's many potential nice ways in. So, all right, so let's see what happened. So H4 is played. I think that's just another really nice improving move, fixing the H5 and G6 pawns, just slightly improving. Rook C8, and now A6. Okay, so A6 makes sense kind of in an expedient way. And of course, it can't be taken because of Bishop D4 dynamics, right? So we have Bishop D4, Rook takes A7 business. And I mean, I think, Sarvagna, your idea of Bishop C8 after A6 might have been an idea if the Rook didn't go to C8. But hey, I mean, the black pieces are so tied down. I mean, it's even tough to suggest moves. So Rook C8, A6 takes Bishop D4, King B8, takes an A7. We can see all the pawns are weak here. I mean, the material is black is still somehow up a pawn, but it doesn't feel that way. And then the white's rook switch around, some more harassment, some more improvement, more tickling, and then eventually white gets in. So it's another nice touch, King H6, Rook E6, more improving. And then finally there's a breakthrough, and we can say, okay, white's winning this one. Right? I think we're all in agreement here. You know, this position is truly awful. Now the material is also equal, and the F pawn is a clear pass pawn. So, you know, as some in the chat are saying, yeah, that's GG. That's pretty much GG. So, I mean, now black decides to play D4, but it's really too late. And there's just not much going on here. I mean, enough pawns, and you know, the game was called off here. Really instructive. Again, the dynamic of the opposite colored bishops in this position, the activity, the king position, and the rook pawn as a wedge to sometimes create mating ideas deep into the end game, and also just seize on space. And I think the parallels between this game and the previous game are really significant. But again, look at the position. I'm just going all the way back to the beginning here really quickly. It's surprising to me that this position is completely winning for white. I wouldn't have thought that just looking at it for a split second, and it requires more kind of understanding to really see, oh, wow, this is really terrible. And F3 is really the start of it. So Austin is asking me, what does Stockfish say from here? I have not run this with like the modern engines. I played over some of these games and I was like, wow, this is remarkable, but I've not run it with Stockfish 13. But I'm sure that Stockfish 13 would probably be more in alignment, because they're all basically the strongest engines today are all using the same neural network methodology. At least that's my understanding of it. They're more similar than they were when it was just AlphaZero with this new learning technique for finding moves and self-taught. So All right, let's go to the next example, which is more extreme. This one, I mean, I know I said the first two examples really surprised me and shook me in various ways. This one really, I still can't get over it. And I hope you have that same reaction when you see it. I'm not giving it away and saying that it's going to be so, remarkable. But I really, really am keen on showing you this one. So let me move forward to the position in question. Kostya is teaching me how to use chess space properly. So but instead of switching tabs to new boards, I'm just doing load next position in chess space. Good to know. All right, so there's an extra bishop here. Black takes the bishop. And we have a very interesting position here where, this is another game. It's in the recent TCEC season, the TSEC season that finished. I think they're in season 21 now, but it's season 20 earlier this year. And yeah, these computers, I always read this Pirachu and I think Pikachu. I know it's not Pikachu, but when I was a kid, I was definitely into Pokemon when I was like 10. So Pirachu and Cheese, funny names for entrants, but they're obviously very strong. And I looked at this position and just so many of the moves just completely surprised me, but I didn't really think there was really a scenario where White would win this game, especially after White's next move. And I challenge anyone and everyone to actually just predict White's next move in the chat. So if you have any idea for what the next move is, go ahead and type it in, and I'm just gonna read some wrong moves after some time. So I'll give you all like 20, 30 seconds, and then we'll see what you come up with. I'll read them out if they're wrong. Okay, so I see enough moves here. So G4, no. G4, no. Interesting move, trying to deal with the H3 pawn. Rook AC1, no. Rook AC1, bishop takes A2, and I think you lose dropping A2. King H2, no. Rook A5, no. Bishop D4, no. Bishop H8. All right, so now people are just throwing almost. King F1, no. All right, so one move is correct, and of course one move is correct. It's chess. What are we doing? But I'm just going to show it. A4. That move already surprised me. I mean, it might seem like okay, that you're just pushing a pawn, but Black's obviously Black has the opportunity to take on H3, and it really seems to me like Black has a pretty decent potential for light square grip. So it's hard for me to imagine just racing the A pawn would really make a crazy difference, and that Black would be in some real trouble. So let's see what happens. So A4, bishop takes H3. Again, my thought when looking at this was, well, okay, I see the A pawn as a factor, but the light squares are kind of weak on the king side. Maybe the bishop parks itself on a decent diagonal, and the queening square is a light square. So what's the real problem? So naturally, A5 needs to be played. The pawn needs to continue. That's the real asset at this point. Rook B2, A6, Rook A8, Rook C7. Attacking E7 actually is pretty important. E5. Now we can see some dark squares have been weakened on the king side. We can say, okay, maybe I can see Rook C7. You get your Rook to the 7th rank. You weaken some dark squares. Maybe Black's king has some issues. And we're going to get to the good part. So Rook C5. Again, a very clever move, because what you have here is a situation where by tempting this pawn forward, not only have some dark squares been weakened, but you're also making it extremely difficult for the bishop that I was claiming would have some potential defending by getting to a long diagonal, actually getting there. So here, Black played E4, and it's very difficult now for the bishop to challenge. And that's where there's a parallel to the previous games in a way thus far, where it's like maybe the bishop on H3 is a little out of position. Now, some are asking, why not F6? That's a fair question. I think the biggest thing maybe would be that white would come right back to c6 or c7 and say, now the 7th rank is a problem. So maybe there's some world where rook c7 in combination with bishop h6, and all of a sudden we have back rank issues like the Caro-Kann. Oh, it was a Caro-Kann actually, the last game. Like that position we just looked at where the king was on a8. All of a sudden the king on g8 feels very, very airy. So that would be my best guess. But anyway, so rook c5, e4, a7, bishop e6. Okay, so the bishop's coming back to the diagonal, we can say. Rook c1, h5. Very nice move, I thought, giving the king security in from the back rank, giving it extra squares, and also fixing the g3 pawn. Makes a lot of sense. Does weaken some dark squares. We might need to talk about that later, though, Ryo. Nice to point out. Rook b1, rook takes b1, rook takes b1, and bishop d5. And this is where I want to stop and just ask you, how do you win this game? Because I saw this mission, I was like, Black probably shouldn't lose this with best play. I was like, well, this looks pretty defensible to me. I mean, the bishop having to hold a7 is, a little bit annoying, but, basically I thought with the obstacle of bishops holding the queening square, it would be really difficult to see how you'd actually win this game if Black doesn't blunder. But we're going to need with our answers here, we're going to need a long-term vision. So you can give me a move or two and your idea, your 5 to 10 move plan. Most of you are youngsters, right? But as adults are like, well, some people are like, what's your 5 to 10 year plan? What's your 3 to 5 year plan? That's what we need for this position. We need that type of plan. So let me take a look here at what folks are thinking about. All right, so I haven't heard from Havish. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Please correct me if I'm not.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I thought rook b8 check, and that kind of locks up Black's rook, and we can create counterplay with moves like bishop d4, and we can bring the king and try to, because Black's rook is just locked, so we can try to win with the dark square weaknesses. Maybe bring the king to e5 or f6.
So you're saying, so rook b8, let's make a few moves so rook b8 check, king g7. You're saying bishop d4? Was that what you were thinking? Avish? I know, I'll keep it moving. So bishop d4 check, f6. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to kind of soften that up a little bit. But what would you do? Well, I mean, the thing is, even from here, it seems to me like it's tough to completely improve. I mean, you can attack the bishop a bunch of times, and maybe if you're able to push the bishop off the diagonal, you can make some hay. I don't know. It's an interesting plan. All right. Anyone else have any ideas? If I go back here. Christopher?
Hello? Yeah?
Yep.
So I'm thinking rook b5. So you want the bishop on c6. So after rook b8 check, king g7, bishop d4, f6, there is rook b6.
Right. So you're trying to essentially get at the f6 pawn. So let's take a look at this. So rook b5, bishop c6. You're saying rook b6 first after bishop c6, rook b6?
I'm thinking rook b8 check. So
rook b8 check, king g7,
bishop d4,
bishop d4, f6, and then rook b6.
That's the point. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that makes some sense to me. I mean, if you're able to push the bishop off the diagonal and then also extract a dark square a dark square, a pawn on this side of the board, then the 4 versus 2 majority becomes less worrisome. This is not what was done in the game, but it would definitely need to be checked. Let me see if there's anything immediately wrong with it. I'm not sure. So bishop d5, e8 check. Yeah, it looks most of the moves look pretty logical to me. Bishop d4, f6. I mean, maybe there's a world in which black goes king h6 here. Maybe that makes some difference, not having to tempt the pawn to f7 right away, and then I can keep the bishop coming to e6 for stability, because maybe my king can come around to g5 now. So that would be my one consideration here, that for maybe why this wasn't played. Because I'm not completely sure if white's getting mate. It doesn't seem like black's getting mated here. It's like bishop f6. There's g5.
Maybe I can go king f1 instead of bishop f6. Just g5. There's always rook b6.
Yeah. Maybe I put the bishop on, keep the bishop on the diagonal. Move it off this particular. Keep it on the diagonal. Move it off of c6, and the game continues. Basically, you're kind of getting. I'm gonna mute you now just for the background noise. But that isn't in part one of the themes that was interesting about this initial position. If you go back to right before, in this position right after bishop d5, is that, some of you also were suggesting moving the king, like king f1, king e2, or maybe you'll stay on the dark squares not to run into bishop c4 check, running the king to the king side, or to the queen side, and then trying to improve. But the thing is, you do have a 4 versus 2 on the king side that you have to contend with. So all of a sudden, black could get some counterplay with g5 and h4 at some point, which would push your bishop off the diagonal. So that's what makes it not completely clear. I mean, obviously, if you had the h4 pawn here and you hadn't blundered, or rather sacrificed the h pawn early in the game, then you'd feel much better about yourself, because you wouldn't have to worry about any potential passed pawn. But what happened here was just very shocking, very, very shocking. So let's take a look and try to understand what happened. So rook b5 was played, rook b5 was played. Bishop c6, rook b8 check, king g7, and king h2. And with king h2, I was like, what is going on? Why is the king going to h2? What is the entry point for the king going through the king side? It seems to me that black should be able to prevent the king from basically doing like short Timon again and getting to g5. It doesn't seem like that's a realistic maneuver, but somehow it is. And after king h2, bishop d5. By the way, I will just say I was. We'll come back to this position a little bit later, maybe to sort of figure out why it was played at this particular moment. But after bishop d5, white played g4, and I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" I was like, "Wow. Like, if this does not, get you off your seat or just like mentally get you engaged, I don't know what will, because this was truly appalling that this could even be played." Now, the justification is obviously the king has an a path to the middle now, and the dark squares are sensitive. But I think the bigger part of it that you have to kind of reckon with is now white seems to have a 4 versus 1 on the king side. How in the world are you going to break the blockade on the queen side when there's a 4 versus 1 majority? And what you discover is that the majority doesn't move. And again, you see the power of the bishop holding particular diagonals. And so after h takes g4, king g3 was played. And black played king f6. Black did not even bother trying to hold on to the pawn. And if f5, does anyone want to just give some type of line or variation why f5 isn't really beating the mark? Liam? The floor is yours if you want to take it.
Hello.
Yep.
Well, I thought White could play King F4 with the idea that the White King is gonna get basically to E5, D6, and try to chase away the bishop off the diagonal. And if King F6 ever comes, those bishop D4 and maybe Rook B6, King E5 ideas or something like that.
Yeah, essentially kind of similar to the line that was mentioned before by Christopher. As soon as the F pawn is tempted forward, the bishop doesn't have security. So there are really only 3 squares on the diagonal that work. And essentially with the 7th rank being exposed, you can always kind of nudge the bishop off the diagonal. And, again, as Liam is mentioning, the king can't actually establish opposition and box out the black king. And so it's really impossible to prevent this invasion. But I think the really important point to understand here as well is that this bishop can actually hold 3 pawns by itself. So giving up the pawn doesn't actually change much of the dynamics in the position if the pawns can be firmly controlled. And I think that was the thing that really was honestly appalling to me just looking at it. It's like, you can get away with this? Like, this is really possible. So I could not, it was just shocking to me. So after King G3, Black played King F6 and just gave up the pawn. And after King takes G4, it's, Black is going to be struggling to control the counterplay because you can't set up a dark square bind that prevents the king from invading without ceding the 7th rank. It's just lost. I mean, there's nothing else to it. Of course, it requires technique and needling and some patience. But I think in a practical game, this is the position that I think most of you would win, comfortably, just because a human player would have a tremendous amount of time even dealing with the fact that the bishop is unprotected, the black king's a little bit exposed, and Black really has no really constructive active plan. They just have to constantly worry about not losing material. So King E6 was played, King G5. The bishop now went to F4 because now the bishop doesn't even have to worry about the black pawns right now. And Rook B6 pushed the king back some more, and then Bishop E3, a very nice finesse. King D7 was played. What's wrong with Rook takes A7? Zoe? Floor is yours.
I want to play Bishop C5 check, and wherever the king goes, then the rook has a check.
All right, so King D7 or King D8. Like I said, King D8.
What?
So if the king goes to the 8th rank, what if King D8?
I can play Rook B8 check.
Yeah, so if the king goes to the 8th rank, there's Rook B8, and if the king goes to D7, there's Rook D6 picking up the bishop on D5. So there's no. Oops. Sorry. So there's no constructive way to take the pawn. So now White managed to push the king back and extract these gains. So King D7, King F6, and you can see the writing on the wall pretty much at this point. I mean, King C6, C8, Rook D5, King E7. I mean, again, the domination themes are quite on display. Now all the pawns drop because of it. And ultimately, I mean, the computer actually gave up the rook, and there's not much to see here. But wow. Again, I just think, obviously, some of this could be beyond our scope as far as what we're capable of doing in our games. But I think you can kind of get the picture that the thing that shocked me is, one, even giving up the H pawn. I really don't think most people would do this here because they think the bishop would come back to the diagonal and try and hold things together. And then you also, it seems like you're giving black the opportunity to create a pass pawn that, you know, might be annoying to deal with. So that was kind of surprising. 2, trading the rook on b2. We did not really speak about this move in depth, but I think a lot of people would say, well, keeping the 2 rooks on the board gives more chances. But, you know, one of the things that the stronger engines have really confirmed is trading active pieces for pass, or trading away your opponent's active pieces. So you identify the rook on b2 is really the only truly active piece. You get rid of it and you leave them with all passive pieces, which makes the defense harder, even though it's a trade. And then last but not least, just going with the king towards the king side. I mean, ridiculous. I mean, to me, it seemed that the king would surely come up through the center, and that would be the way you get counterplay. But then then the bishop might have to serve 2 masters, defend the a7 pawn and also worrying about a passer. And the fact that even though you're a pawn down here, you can actually enter through the king side is just ridiculous. And last but not least, the stability of the bishop. Because if we get to this position after king h2, and we consider, well, maybe g4 could have been stopped with f5, you understand that the bishop lacks stability, and the defensive bishop, that is the light squared bishop. And because of that, it allows for dynamics where there's always these tactics to deal with. And that's just, just insane. So there were some other endgame positions that I could have shown, but I think, I think I'll leave you with this one. Yeah, think about those opposite colored bishop positions a little bit more. Of course, we've evolved from thinking that they're not a draw, but I think that the rook pawns in conjunction with breakthrough ideas really, really do change the game and give us new ways to try to win.